I heard my daughter's voice before I even stepped fully into the hallway, and the words hit me so hard I stopped walking. She said it so calmly, like she'd rehearsed it. He has nowhere to go, no support system. It's just me now. I felt the bottom drop out of my chest. I stood there holding my appointment folder, staring at the half-open door, wondering if I had misheard her. But the doctor's quiet sigh told me I hadn't. He sounded almost sympathetic, the way someone would talk about a man who'd lost everything. I took one step closer, and the doctor's eyes lifted to the doorway and landed on me. That soft pity in his face. That was the moment I knew my daughter hadn't just made a mistake. She'd painted a picture of me I didn't recognize. I pushed the door open and walked in. My daughter glanced at me, and something in her expression tightened for half a second. She recovered fast, forcing a smile that felt thin and brittle. "Dad, you're early," she said, as if I hadn't heard every word. The doctor nodded at me, his tone gentle. "We were just discussing your situation. Your daughter says things have been difficult at home." I couldn't speak at first. Difficult? Home? I owned my home outright. I paid every bill, took care of my yard, cooked my meals, and helped her financially whenever she asked. I wasn't the lost, helpless man she was describing. "Difficult how?" I finally asked. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. She didn't meet my eyes. She straightened a stack of forms on the counter and said, "Dad, please, we'll talk about it later." That was the first dismissal of the day, and it felt like a door closing. I tried again. "Why would you tell him I have nowhere to go?" "That's not true." She shook her head and let out a breath that carried more annoyance than concern. "You're misunderstanding. I was just giving context." But the doctor had already formed his impression, and there was no reach inside his mind to undo it. He cleared his throat, asking me a few questions about my routines and living situation. The kind of questions doctors ask when they're evaluating someone's ability to manage daily life. Questions I had never needed before. My daughter kept jumping in, answering for me, smoothing over her earlier claims as if they were harmless exaggeration. But the damage was already done. Every time she spoke for me, I felt something tightening inside my chest, like she was slowly taking ownership of my story. I kept replaying the words I heard in the hallway. "He has nowhere to go." It wasn't an accident. It wasn't kindness. It was a framing, a setup, and I had no idea why. When the appointment ended, I tried to ask her again what she meant. She brushed past my question. "Dad, you misheard. You always do this when you're stressed." That line sat heavy on my tongue. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, but today it sounded different, practiced, strategic. She walked fast down the hall, leaving me struggling to keep up with my own thoughts. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I stood beside my car for a long moment, trying to make sense of the shift I had just witnessed. It felt like the ground had tilted, and I was trying to find something steady to hold on to. My daughter had rewritten me into someone fragile, someone dependent, someone who could be managed. And the worst part was how easily the doctor believed her. As I sat behind the wheel, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. Something had begun today, something I didn't understand yet, but could feel closing in on me. Would you question your child after hearing something like this? I didn't realize how quickly distance can turn into control until the weeks after that appointment. At first, I kept telling myself my daughter was just busy, that life had pulled her in different directions. We used to talk every evening, even if it was only for a few minutes. She would tell me about work, and I would share whatever small thing happened in my day. But now, when I called, the phone rang until it broke into voicemail. She would text hours later with short replies that didn't sound like her at all. "Busy. Talk later. In a meeting." Everything handled. I kept reading those messages, wondering when she stopped wanting to hear my voice. The strangest part was how she seemed annoyed when I tried to bring up the lie I overheard. Anytime I asked about it, she immediately shifted the subject, as if acknowledging it might undo something she'd already set in motion. She began answering my questions before I even finished asking them, speaking fast, telling me not to stress about things I didn't understand. The tone was new, sharp around the edges, with a kind of impatience she never used to have with me. It got worse during the next doctor visit. I remember sitting on the exam table, waiting for the doctor to walk in. Before I could explain why I was there, she stepped forward and said, "He's been a little forgetful. I'll explain everything." I stared at her, stunned, while she described symptoms I didn't have. The doctor wrote notes while she talked, not while I did. When I tried to interrupt, she placed a hand on my arm and whispered, "Dad, please, let me handle it." I felt myself shrink into the silence she created for me. After that appointment, she started mentioning updates from the doctors, test results, recommendations, follow-up steps. But none of the doctors ever told me any of those things. Everything came filtered through her, and every detail seemed to point toward me needing more oversight. When I called the office myself, the nurse said my daughter had already spoken to them and confirmed all communication should go through her. I hung up the phone and just sat there, trying to understand how my own medical information no longer belonged to me. Around the same time, she introduced her new partner. He shook my hand firmly, studying me in a way that felt more like an assessment than a greeting. He made comments about aging, about how some people don't notice their decline until it's too late. He spoke like he already knew everything about me, like he'd been briefed. Every time I tried to speak, he looked at my daughter first, waiting for her reaction. It was clear he had opinions about how she should manage things, and she listened to him more closely than she ever listened to me. Then the mail started changing. Bills I always received on time stopped arriving. Forms I needed never showed up. When I asked her if she had seen them, she waved it off. I already handled it. You don't need to worry. But I hadn't asked her to handle anything. I looked around my house, checking drawers and counters, wondering if the envelopes had been misplaced or taken. It was the first moment I felt a quiet panic settle in the back of my mind. One night, after she sent another message saying she'd updated the doctor without telling me what she said, I sat alone in my living room and tried to piece everything together. Her missed calls, the rushed explanations, the way she spoke for me, the missing mail, the new partner who treated me like a case study. It wasn't random. It wasn't drifting. She was shaping a version of me that didn't exist. A weaker man, a dependent man, a man who needed someone else to make decisions for him. And the worst part was how easily everyone around her believed it. It started with a small notification on my phone, one of those automated alerts from the bank that I usually skim and forget. But this one said a withdrawal had been made from an account I hadn't touched in months. At first, I thought maybe I had set up a bill payment and simply forgotten. But the amount didn't match anything familiar. I checked my email to see if I had overlooked something, and another alert waited there. It mentioned an address change request, supposedly made by account holder. I sat back in my chair, staring at the words, feeling a slow, cold pressure build in my chest. When I asked my daughter about it, hoping she might know something, she didn't even pause to think. Dad, you probably just misremembered. You've been mixing things up a lot lately. Her voice was calm, but too quick, like she had been expecting the question. The way she looked at me while saying it made the room feel smaller. I tried to insist, telling her I keep track of every payment, but she cut me off with a tired sigh. Let it go. I already checked everything. I didn't know what bothered me more, her words or the sound of a drawer clicking shut behind her. I hadn't even noticed her walking toward it until she locked it. That drawer used to hold my bank statements, insurance papers, and old receipts. It had never been locked before. When I reached for the handle, more out of habit than suspicion, she stepped between me and the desk. You don't need to be digging through all that. I already organized it. She said it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, I searched the house for the most recent statements. They were gone. The folders I always kept on the top shelf of the hallway cabinet were moved, and the envelopes inside them were thinner. A few were missing completely. I went through every drawer, every stack of papers, even the small box where I kept old medical bills, but the documents I needed were nowhere. The next day, another charge appeared on my bank app, something labeled as consulting support. The name attached to it was familiar. It belonged to my daughter's partner. He had mentioned doing account management work the last time we met, but I never hired him. I never signed anything. The thought that he had access to my information made my stomach tighten. I called the bank to ask for details. The representative said some of the recent changes had been made through authorized channels, meaning someone had my login or had been listed as a joint contact. I knew I hadn't added anyone. I asked for a mailed copy of the last 3 months of statements. She said they had already been requested and sent to an address I didn't recognize. I hung up the phone and sat with my hands shaking in my lap. For the first time, I reached for a notebook and wrote down everything. The dates, the charges, the new address, the missing papers, the locked drawer. My handwriting wasn't as steady as it used to be, but I needed the record. I needed proof that these weren't mistakes in my memory. These things were happening outside of me, not inside my head. Over the next few days, more signs appeared. A letter from my insurance company mentioned a policy update I never approved. My credit card company emailed about a security check on unusual activity. Every time I asked my daughter if she knew anything, she brushed me off with a soft voice that felt rehearsed. "Dad, you're worrying too much. I already handled it." The more she said it, the more certain I became that she wasn't trying to calm me. She was trying to direct me, to push me in a certain direction, to make sure I stopped asking questions. One evening, after she left the house, I opened the notebook again. I looked at the list of strange charges, missing documents, changes I hadn't approved, and the drawer she didn't want me touching. And for the first time since this started, I felt something sharp and heavy settle inside me. These weren't accidents. These weren't slips of memory. Someone was preparing to take control of my life, and they were building the evidence behind my back. Would you question these signs? I started noticing the shift during a routine checkup. The doctor asked me a simple question about my medication schedule, and before I could answer, my daughter stepped in and spoke over me. "He forgets it all the time," she said, as if I wasn't even in the room. The doctor gave me a long, careful look, the kind reserved for people who can't speak for themselves. I opened my mouth to correct her, but she touched my arm lightly, the way someone quiets a confused child. That small gesture burned more than anything she said. On the ride home, I asked her why she'd said that. She didn't look away from the road. "Dad, I'm just telling them what they need to know. You don't remember things like you used to." Her voice was calm, almost bored, as if this was a settled fact. I tried to remind her of the times she had asked me for help, tax questions, advice about her job, but she brushed me off with a sigh. "Those are different. You mix up important things now." In the weeks that followed, she started managing my medical details without asking. She would tell me she had already spoken to the nurse or that an appointment had been moved. When I tried to call the office myself, I was told they had spoken with my daughter earlier in the day and assumed she was handling everything. I didn't like how easily that door closed in my face. Mail started arriving late, and some envelopes didn't arrive at all. At first, I blamed the postal service, but then I found a small stack of my letters tucked into her bag one afternoon while she was visiting. She said she was sorting things to help me stay organized. When I asked why insurance notices were missing, she smiled gently. "I already took care of those. You don't have to stress about it." That smile didn't comfort me. It chilled me. One evening, she laid a set of papers on my kitchen table. "These are just for safety," she said. "Power of attorney forms. Nothing urgent. Just sign where I marked." She pushed a pen toward me. My hands tightened around the edge of the table. I asked her why I needed something like that. She gave a small, patient laugh. "Dad, everyone your age has one. I'm trying to protect you." I didn't sign. She didn't push that day, but her expression changed. Something closed off. Something calculating. A few days later, I checked the calendar where I always wrote down my doctor visits. 2 of them had been crossed out in neat, heavy lines. When I called the office to ask why, the receptionist said, "Your daughter rescheduled on your behalf." I felt the floor shift under me. My own schedule, my own time, was no longer mine. The worst part was how quiet the house felt afterward. I sat alone with the phone in my hand, wondering if calling her would make things worse. I hated the idea of doubting my own child, the girl I had raised with steady hands and simple hopes. But every step she took pressed me into a smaller space. Every "you're forgetting things" cut a little deeper. One night, after she left, I stared at the stack of unread papers on the table. My name was printed on every page, yet I felt like the words inside belonged to someone else. Someone she was trying to create. Someone incompetent. Someone who needed to be managed. For the first time, a heavy, unwelcome thought pushed its way forward. Maybe I needed legal advice. Maybe I had to protect myself from the person I never thought I'd fear. But even thinking that made me feel ashamed. What kind of father suspects his own child? Still, the feeling wouldn't leave. Would these red flags worry you? I spent that night at the kitchen table with the lights low, trying to steady my hands long enough to sort through the mess my life had become. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest. I laid out a folder, a notepad, and every envelope I could find. If my daughter was building a story about my decline, I needed to build one about the truth. The first thing I did was gather my bank statements. I kept them in a drawer near the pantry, a place I'd used for years. When I pulled the drawer open, half the stack was gone. Only a few recent statements remained, and they had strange gaps, missing pages, balances that didn't match what I remembered, and transactions I would never make. I read them twice, then wrote each number down slowly, line by line, making sure I wasn't confusing anything. But the pattern was too clear to ignore. One statement had a change in contact information. My phone number had been replaced with another. When I stared at the document long enough, I realized the handwriting in the margin wasn't mine. It was too smooth, too quick. My daughter once wrote my grocery list when I broke my wrist. This looked just like that. The room felt smaller after that discovery. Next, I went through my insurance papers. I found notices saying I'd confirmed certain updates. I hadn't spoken to anyone. Some signatures looked like poor imitations of mine, not exact copies, but close enough that someone might think I had rushed through them. As I flipped through the pages, one name kept appearing, my daughter's partner. He was listed as a consultant, a term that didn't belong anywhere near my accounts. I barely trusted him with casual conversation, let alone access to my financial life. He and my daughter had always shared strong opinions about protecting assets and planning ahead. I had never imagined those words could twist into something dangerous. I moved everything into one pile and started a timeline. I wrote down the day she intercepted my mail, the appointment she rescheduled without telling me, the first time she said I was forgetting things, the moment the doctor looked at me with pity. Seeing it all written out made my stomach turn. This wasn't scattered worry. This was a steady climb towards something that threatened my independence. I kept my voice low, even though I was alone. Fear of being overheard felt ridiculous, but I followed it anyway. I folded the papers and slid them into a plain folder, then tucked the folder inside an old jacket. It felt strange to hide something in my own home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that even silence had ears now. That night, after pacing the living room for nearly an hour, I opened my laptop and searched for elder law attorneys. My finger hovered over the trackpad longer than it should have. Calling a lawyer meant admitting the truth, that my own child might be preparing to take control of my life without my consent. It meant stepping into a fight I never wanted. But doing nothing felt worse. I whispered the number to myself before dialing, just to hear how it sounded. When the receptionist answered, my voice shook, but I managed to ask for a consultation. She offered a morning appointment 2 days later. I wrote it on a sticky note and placed it under my coffee mug, as if hiding it made it easier to accept. When the day came, I dressed slowly. Shirt buttoned wrong the first time, shoes tied too tight. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a man caught between fear and resolve. I grabbed the jacket with the folder inside and stepped outside, locking the door behind me with a kind of finality I didn't expect. Walking into the lawyer's office felt like stepping into another world, one where the truth might finally be seen clearly. My heart was heavy, but steady. Whatever happened next, I knew this step would change everything. Have you ever helped protect a vulnerable elder? I sat across from the lawyer as he opened the folder I had carried in like it was fragile. The office was quiet, heavy with the kind of seriousness that makes you sit straighter without thinking. He read the first few pages without speaking, his eyes narrowing only slightly, but enough for me to understand that my fears weren't just in my head. When he reached the forged signature, he paused, tapped his finger once on the paper, and asked me if I had ever approved anything over the phone. I told him no, not once. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He just kept reading, shifting between the statements, the notes I'd written, and the timeline I had organized. Every so often he let out a small breath, the kind people use when something deeply troubling becomes clear. When he finally closed the folder, he leaned back and said, "My situation needed more than just legal advice. It needed oversight from Elder Protection Services." A caseworker from Adult Protective Services came in a few minutes later. She introduced herself softly, as if she already knew my heart was in a fragile state. She reviewed the folder with the same steady seriousness. When she reached the part about my daughter telling the doctor I had nowhere to go, her face tightened. She asked simple questions. Had I been prevented from attending appointments? Had my mail been redirected? Had anyone suggested changes to my financial accounts without my clear consent? I answered yes to all of them. She didn't look surprised. That hurt more than anything. She explained that misrepresentation to medical staff, interference with financial mail, and changes to emergency contacts were all early indicators of potential exploitation. She also said something that made my chest feel hollow, that these situations often start with small steps, each one justified by the abuser as protecting the elder, until the elder no longer recognizes how much control has been taken away. The lawyer asked me to tell the story from the beginning while he took notes. I described the lies she told at the hospital, the missing statements, the way she spoke for me like I wasn't capable of my own thoughts. Saying it out loud made everything heavier. My voice cracked once, but they didn't push me. They let me sit in silence until I steadied myself again. After I finished, the lawyer said the evidence suggested a deliberate pattern, not misunderstandings, not mistakes, but a slow narrowing of my independence. The caseworker nodded and said they would open a quiet investigation to protect me. The word protect landed strangely. I had spent a lifetime being the protector, not the protected. They explained that no action would be taken yet. They needed more information, more context, more signs. The process would be careful. That caution reassured me. Real justice never rushes. The lawyer asked if I understood the risk of moving forward. I said yes, though the truth was heavier than a single word could express. This wasn't just about bank accounts or forged signatures. This was my daughter, my only child. And if these professionals were right, she had been preparing to take control of my life piece by piece. The caseworker placed a card on the table and said I could call any time, even after hours, if I felt unsafe or pressured. I stared at the small rectangle of paper, feeling as if accepting it meant admitting my daughter was capable of harming me. That realization sat like a stone in my stomach. When the meeting ended, I walked out of the office with the folder held close, my steps slow but steady. I felt a strange mix of relief and deep dread. For the first time, people who understood the law and human behavior had confirmed what I feared. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan, and I knew then that a confrontation was coming, one I had spent my whole life praying I would never face. There was no turning back now. I asked my daughter to come over in the afternoon. I didn't tell her why. I needed her to walk into the truth without preparing a script. When she arrived, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, acting as if she already expected a complaint. I didn't start with anger. I simply asked her to sit. She rolled her eyes, but she did. I placed the folder on the table between us. She looked at it like it was nothing more than a stack of old mail. I began with the hospital incident, asking her why she told the doctor I had nowhere to go. She gave a soft laugh, the kind someone uses when they want to seem patient. She said I must have misunderstood, that she had only been trying to help the doctor understand my living situation. I asked her what situation she meant. Her face tightened. She said she'd been under stress, that everything had been hectic, and maybe she used the wrong words. I reminded her that I own my home. She said, "Dad, you get confused sometimes." That was the first cut. I opened the folder and pulled out the first bank notice with the unexplained withdrawal. She looked at it for a second, then said she had handled it on my behalf because I needed help. When I showed her the second statement, her voice sharpened as she insisted the bank must have sent something in error. I reached for the page with the signature that wasn't mine. She stared at it and said, "I probably forgot signing it." I told her I'd already shown it to a lawyer. Her expression changed, not to guilt, but to fear of being exposed. She stood up fast, saying I was overreacting, saying everyone had been worried about my memory, saying she had only stepped in to protect me. I told her that wasn't what the evidence showed. I told her officials had reviewed everything and confirmed signs of exploitation. Her shoulders stiffened. She glanced toward the window, not at me. Then she blamed her partner, claiming he had advised her to prepare early for my decline. She said he handled most of the financial stuff anyway. That slip was all I needed to hear. A knock came at the door before she could finish her excuses. 2 representatives from Adult Protective Services, along with a police officer, stood calmly with a packet of documents. They greeted me kindly. They addressed her with formality. They explained that a case had been opened, and she would need to answer questions regarding changes made to my accounts and medical records. Her partner wasn't home, but his name was all over the paperwork. She backed away from the door, shaking her head, saying this was all a misunderstanding, that she had never meant harm. But the truth sat on the table between us in black and white. Every denial she gave collapsed under the weight of her own actions. She tried to blame stress. She tried to blame miscommunication. She tried to blame me. Nothing held. When the officials asked her directly about redirected mail, she had no answer at all. She avoided my eyes the entire time. When they stepped outside to speak with her privately, I stayed seated. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the heartbreak settling inside me. I had hoped, even after everything, that she might tell the truth. Instead, she chose lies until she ran out of them. Watching her argue with the officers through the open doorway, I realized I didn't recognize the person she had become. When she finally left with them, I stood alone in the quiet. The house felt heavy, as if the walls had absorbed every painful word. I understood then that whatever bond we once had was gone. She had crossed a line that could never be repaired. I felt hollow, but I also felt certain. For the first time, I knew exactly where I stood. Would you cut ties at this point? I measure my life differently now. The days move slower, not because of age, but because the noise that once filled my head has quieted. After the trial, after the evidence was laid out, and every lie finally landed where it belonged, I went home and sat in the living room for a long time. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't reach for the radio. I just listened to the house settle around me. It felt like I was living inside the echo of everything that had broken, and somehow I had to learn how to breathe in it. The routines I cling to now are simple. I wake up early, make coffee, and sit by the kitchen window where the morning light lands first. Some mornings I read the paper. Some mornings I just hold it without opening it. I walk around the block when my knees allow it. I keep my appointments organized on a small notepad because it calms me to see everything written down. No one else touches my paperwork anymore. No one redirects my mail. No one speaks on my behalf. That alone feels like a kind of freedom I never thought I'd need to fight for. I think about the trial more often than I admit. Hearing professionals describe what had been happening to me, hearing them call it exploitation, manipulation, intentional misrepresentation, forced me to see the situation as it truly was, not as the memory of a father trying to protect his child. The judge's words still sit heavy in my mind. I remember her saying that elder abuse often begins with small steps, small lies, small shifts in control. I remember how my daughter didn't look at me once as the verdict was read. People like to say time heals everything, but that isn't true. Some wounds scab over, but they stay tender underneath. I've accepted that. There is no version of this story where she comes back, admits everything, and we pretend nothing happened. That would erase the years I spent doubting myself, the nights I stayed awake wondering if I was losing my mind, the moments when her voice made me feel smaller than my own shadow. I can't forget that, and I won't pretend to. What I carry forward is quieter, but more honest. I carry the knowledge that trust is not something to hand out blindly, even to family. I carry the understanding that aging doesn't make a person weak. It just makes them easier to underestimate. I carry the truth that respect must go both ways, no matter how old you are or how old your children become. I've learned to put boundaries in place. I don't answer calls from unknown numbers. I keep copies of every important document in a locked drawer that only I can open. I meet with a support group for older adults once a week. Listening to them, I realize how common stories like mine are. Too many parents think love is a shield that protects them from betrayal. Too many discover too late that love is not always enough to stop someone from taking advantage. Still, there is strength in surviving something like this. Quiet strength, not the loud kind people brag about. Strength that comes from standing up after you've been knocked down by someone you raised, someone you trusted. I didn't think I had that in me, but I do, and that matters. If anyone watching my story takes anything from it, I hope it's this. Elders deserve protection, not pity. We deserve respect, not dismissal. And when something feels wrong, it usually is. Speak up. Ask for help. Do not wait for the damage to become unbearable. I've rebuilt my life, piece by piece. It's not the life I imagined, but it is mine. And for now, that is enough. What would you have done in my place?